What's up, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with NIO, Tesla SPY, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down what's going on with the economic calendar moving forward and talk about other factors out there as we have CPI data coming out. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. The offer ends very soon, in just about 2 weeks from now. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. Unfortunately for NIO, we actually saw the share price dip quite a bit. Unfortunately, we got some negative reactions because of some new analyst ratings, not to mention the fact that we saw a lot of the Chinese tickers sell off because of what happened with the stimulus, and the whole market as a whole ended up selling off too. So all those factors came together, which caused NIO to dip, and the head and shoulders like structure that I called out was correct. So far, it's panning out very, very nicely. So the question is, what's going to happen from here? Let's talk about the data real quick. Today, we saw basically tech attempt to rebound, but then we saw the broader markets like finance and health technology end up dipping. That's why the market ended up getting led to the downside as other sectors started to turn. For tomorrow, we have CPI data coming out, so just keep that in mind before market open. That's the biggest factor besides Fed speakers speaking later on. But just know for CPI, we're expecting core month-over-month to be around 0.3%. We're expecting core year-over-year to be around 3.3%. And then month-over-month for all items, we're expecting 0.2%. Everything's expected to be the same, except for CPI for all items year-over-year. We're expecting 2.6%, a slight increase. So we'll see what happens. The data suggests that CPI is going to be decent because crude futures has been kind of flat, and typically when it's flat, we don't see much of a move. It did go up a little bit in October, which could signify a little bit of potential upside for CPI, but it shouldn't be anything too crazy. We're expecting a 41.3% chance that the Fed gives us a pause again, and then that's for like the December meeting, and a 58% chance we get a 25 basis point cut. That's what we're expecting. In terms of earnings, before I start talking about NIO news, just know that Shopify, Home Depot, and SoundHound announced earnings. Shopify had good earnings with good growth overall, very, very positive outlooks, and a nice increase in their overall guidance. So we saw a nice beat on their EPS and revenue, so very, very awesome. SoundHound, on the other hand, had decent earnings. They did beat on revenue, but their loss per share was below it was actually worse than expected. We had a 6-cent loss per share versus the 4-cent expectation. Not to mention the fact that the net loss was at 21.8 million, below what we were expecting. So that is not too good news. Guidance was so-so, but that's why the share price is down. As far as NIO goes, there's been some talk about how the Chinese stimulus was not meeting investor expectations. And then there's also some talk about how the whole market sold off, which also factored into why NIO was dipping. But some analysts, such as Zacks, have come out, and they are giving us some good ratings for NIO over the fact that their earnings should be good. But they are saying that for the time being, when NIO was at $5, they were saying that they recommend selling NIO for some time. And instead, they did change their view, at least historically. But one thing that's actually very important is that despite saying that, they then gave NIO a buy rating again. So they initially gave it a sell rating, then they gave it a buy rating again. So that they're kind of like all over the place. That's part of why we saw this little shift right over here. There were different analysts from different banks that did give NIO negative ratings, but Zach is still saying that NIO is a buy at the lows. So that's a little bit of a shift right there with their different analyst ratings that kind of switch here and there. We also had some news that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change opened up, and once again, NIO is getting a lot of spotlight because of that. That's a good piece of news for them. Volume is at 86 million, so we're getting high volume selling, despite the fact that we're getting some overweight ratings from Maguire. Besides that, the price-price ratio is dipping as NIO is losing some strength. We tend to be green only about 55% of the time historically on Wednesdays, but that depends on CPI, and we'll see what happens from here. In my opinion, I think we look more bearish, unfortunately, as we have a head and shoulders-like structure. I was calling this out for quite some time. We also have this gap down here to fill around the 4.15 area, so there could be more downside coming. But then I think there's going to be a very, very big bounce, and this is just another big buying opportunity. I think NIO will squeeze and start filling these gaps up here in the 6s, the 7s, the 10s. It's going to eventually be running to the 20s. But for the time being, we are a little bit more bearish, and this might dip closer to about the 4.5 area. If that fails us, I see 4.2 coming to fill that gap. We have some gaps to fill, so just be mindful of the risks. So it's on a bit of a downtrend, so just keep that in mind. We have CPI tomorrow. We'll see how that affects us. It might try to push a bit before it starts to dip lower. But But I expect 4.5 or below for NIO, unfortunately. For SPY, we look more bearish. It is favoring 594 to be tested the 20 EMA before it tries to balance. We'll see what kind of reaction it gets. Depending on CPI, will we bounce or dump? It does favor downside, so we'll see how it goes. Nvidia is looking like it wants to push for 150. We'll see if it breaks past that or not, depending on our CPI reports. ES is dipping a bit. We'll be looking for 6,000. If that fails us, we have 5980 coming next. We'll see if it reacts or not. For Bitcoin, we're just range bound between 90,000 and about 86,000. It's going to just trade sideways, so give it some more time to develop. For NQ, we're also trading sideways. I do see a risk of it dipping a little bit lower because of the head and shoulders that's forming on it. Just keep that in mind, guys. There is a risk of NQ kind of dipping because of that. So that could signify that will be dipping back down to about the lower 21,000 area. So give that some time to develop. For others out there, such as the QQQ, just know that we have a very similar setup with this head and shoulders. We could be dipping closer to about 509, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. If that fails us, we're looking for this imbalance back down towards 507. So give that some time to develop. For Aapl, we're looking a little bit more bearish. If we don't break past 225, I do think this might be dipping closer to 222 before we see a bounce. The IWM is going to be testing 236. If that fails us, we dip lower towards 234. We'll see if we get a bounce off that or not, but it might dip a little bit more depending on our data. We might see coin dip a little bit closer to about 305 and then 300 before it tries to bounce. Amazon might push for about 210 before we see a reaction, depending on CPI. So look for a little bit more upside, then we'll see what CPI causes. Meta's kind of flat here and might try to retest 586 before it comes back down and consolidates, and we'll see what happens with CPI. Microsoft looks more bullish, trying to push it for 425. It might go a little bit higher before we see a big reaction. And then Google may also push higher for about 184, and we'll see how it goes from there. But that's what I'm seeing, at least for the charts. As far as NIO goes, just know that we are looking a little bit more bearish. This will favor downside, whereas the market is still holding up well. So just keep that in mind. That's what I'm seeing, at least for the charts moving forward. I'm trying to be very, very unbiased when I say that. I know, guys, it's very painful. It's very hard to see that NIO is looking bearish. But I'm not saying that this is the end of the world. I'm saying that this is a buying opportunity for the long term, again, to load up on those shares for cheap when this thing starts running back down to when it starts running back up to the 20s as the years go on. So this is a long-term buying opportunity, not financial advice when I say that. There could be some short-term downside because of geopolitical factors, what happened with Chinese stimulus, and because the whole market is selling off a bit. So just keep that in mind. That's the reason why I'm calling this out. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic rest of your days. Have a good day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world. And I'll be back tomorrow to give you guys another update on how things look with CPI and also how the market ends up responding. Don't be surprised if NIO tests 4.5, and if that fails us, we will be dipping a little bit lower. All right, so I thank you for listening. Have a good day, guys, and I'll see you guys very soon in the next one. Have a good day, and peace out.